The day Lucas Ashford walked into Martha Hale's store and asked for her by name, the town of Red Hollow stopped breathing. Because men like Lucas, wealthy, handsome, wrapped in tragedy, didn't choose women like Martha. Women too plain, too smart, too alone. The town had already written her ending, spinster, forgotten, buried in numbers and dust. But when his voice cut through the winter silence, something impossible cracked open. And Red Hollow would never forgive her for it. If you're ready to see how a woman no one wanted became the one everyone feared, stay with me until the end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Martha's story reaches. The snow came early to Red Hollow that year, thick and unforgiving. The kind that turned the Montana Territory into a place where people disappeared into themselves and didn't come out until spring. Martha Hale stood behind the counter of her father's general store, her hands moving through inventory with mechanical precision. Canned goods, fabric bolts, lamp oil, nails. Everything had a place. Everything had a number. Everything made sense except the life she was living. 26 years old, and the town had already buried her. Not literally, of course. That would have required someone to care enough to dig. Instead, Red Hollow had done something far crueler. It had erased her while she still breathed. The women didn't invite her to quilting circles. The men didn't tip their hats. Children were warned not to linger too long near her counter, as if spinsterhood might be contagious, passed through the exchange of penny candy and kind words. Martha had learned to wear invisibility like armor. She kept her hair pulled back in a tight bun, no ribbons, no softness. Her dresses were practical, gray, brown, navy, colors that didn't draw the eye or invite comment. She spoke only when spoken to, and even then she measured her words carefully, aware that intelligence in a woman was considered a defect in Red Hollow, something to be pitied or punished, never celebrated. The store was her father's, but the work was hers. Samuel Hale had built the business 30 years ago when Red Hollow was barely a collection of tents and desperate men. Now he spent most days in the back room, his lungs ruined from a lifetime of breathing Montana dust, his body slowly surrendering to time. Martha ran everything, ordered supplies, balanced books, dealt with customers, negotiated with distributors who tried to cheat her because she was a woman and therefore assumed to be stupid. She wasn't stupid. That was her first crime. Her second was refusing to pretend otherwise. The morning bell chimed, bringing in a gust of January wind, and Mrs. Thornton, the banker's wife, wrapped in furs that cost more than Martha would earn in 5 years. She didn't acknowledge Martha's greeting, just swept through the store with her daughter Lily, pointing at items she wanted set aside for delivery. The blue fabric, not the gray, and make sure the coffee is fresh, not the bottom of the barrel like last time. Martha made notes, her face carefully neutral. Of course, Mrs. Thornton. And Lily needs buttons. Pearl, if you have them, she's to be married in the spring. The woman's voice carried that particular tone of triumph reserved for mothers whose daughters had succeeded where others had failed. To the Morrison boy. Very good family. Lily blushed prettily, exactly as a bride-to-be should. She was 19, blonde, soft-spoken. Everything Red Hollow valued in a woman. Everything Martha wasn't. Congratulations, Martha said, and meant it. She didn't begrudge Lily her happiness. The girl had been kind to her once, years ago, before social pressure made kindness too costly. Mrs. Thornton's eyes swept over Martha with barely concealed disdain. It's important to marry young, while there are still good options available. Wait too long, and, well, she gestured vaguely at Martha, as if she were evidence of some moral failing. Opportunities pass. The words landed like stones. Martha's hand stilled on the counter, but her expression didn't change. She'd learned that too, how to let cruelty slide off her surface while it burrowed deep beneath. I'll have everything ready by Thursday, Martha said evenly. When they left, the silence felt heavier than before. Martha returned to her inventory, her fingers finding comfort in columns of numbers that always added up correctly, unlike people, unlike life, unlike the future she'd stopped imagining years ago. The truth was simple and brutal. Martha Hale had committed the unforgivable sin of being born without beauty in a world that measured a woman's worth by her face. She'd compounded the offense by developing a mind that asked questions, solved problems, and refused to pretend confusion to make men comfortable. And she'd sealed her fate by reaching 26 without a husband, crossing that invisible threshold where hope became pity and pity became contempt. Red Hollow had 3 churches, 2 saloons, 1 bank, and exactly 0 tolerance for women who didn't fit the mold. Her father shuffled out from the back room, his breathing labored. "Martha, girl, you need to eat something." "I ate." "You had coffee. That's not eating." He settled into the chair behind the counter, the same chair he'd occupied for 3 decades. "You work too hard." "Someone has to." He studied her with eyes that had watched her transform from a hopeful child into this careful, closed-off woman. "I worry about you." "Don't." The word came out sharper than she intended. She softened her tone. "I'm fine, Papa." "You're not fine. You're—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't wound. "You're disappearing." Martha turned away, busying herself with straightening shelves that didn't need straightening. "I'm right here. Your body's here. But the rest of you—" He shook his head. "I remember when you used to laugh, when you used to read me poetry and talk about places you wanted to see, things you wanted to do. I was a child. Children believe in fairy tales. And what do you believe in now?" Martha's hand stilled on a bolt of calico. The question hung in the air between them, unanswerable because the truth was too bleak to say aloud. She believed in numbers, in inventory, in the reliability of work that didn't judge or abandon or whisper behind cupped hands. She believed in survival, nothing more. The bell chimed again. Martha turned, expecting another customer who would look through her rather than at her. Instead, she found herself facing Lucas Ashford, and the entire world tilted sideways. Everyone in Red Hollow knew Lucas Ashford. He owned the largest ranch in the territory, thousands of acres stretching into the mountains where cattle grazed and horses ran wild. He'd built an empire through shrewd business sense and relentless work, transforming inheritance into dynasty. At 34, he was handsome in that weathered frontier way, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes that had seen too much. He'd married young, a love match that had scandalized his family because Caroline had been a doctor's daughter, educated and opinionated and completely unsuitable according to society's narrow standards. They'd been happy anyway, defiantly so, until fever took her 3 years ago, leaving Lucas with a grief so profound that Red Hollow spoke of it in hushed tones, as if heartbreak were somehow noble when it happened to the right people. He hadn't remarried, hadn't courted, barely came to town except when necessary. The ranch consumed him, people said. Work was his refuge for memory. And now he stood in Martha's store, snow melting off his coat, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Miss Hale." His voice was deep, quiet, surprisingly gentle. Martha's father straightened in his chair, suddenly alert. "Mr. Ashford, what can we do for you?" But Lucas didn't look at her father. His gaze remained fixed on Martha. "I need to speak with Miss Hale, privately, if possible." The words fell like dynamite into still water. Martha felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Men didn't seek private conversation with her. Men barely acknowledged her existence. This had to be about business, something to do with the store, a complaint or question that required her specific knowledge of inventory or accounts. "Of course," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Papa, would you mind watching the counter?" Samuel Hale's eyes moved between Lucas and his daughter, concern and curiosity warring on his weathered face. But he nodded, levering himself up from the chair with effort. Martha led Lucas to the small office at the back of the store, acutely aware of the impropriety, of the gossip this would generate if anyone saw, of the way her hands trembled slightly as she closed the door behind them. The office was cramped, barely large enough for the desk and 2 chairs wedged against overflowing shelves. It smelled of leather and paper and the lavender sachets Martha kept to ward off moths. Lucas seemed too large for the space, his presence filling it completely. "Please sit," Martha said, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. He sat, and she took her position behind the desk, grateful for the barrier of scarred wood between them. This was her territory, her domain of numbers and order. Here, at least, she knew the rules. "What can I do for you, Mr. Ashford?" He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Hale. It's unconventional." Martha's stomach tightened. She'd heard about propositions before, offers from men who assumed a spinster would be grateful for any attention, no matter how degrading. She prepared herself to refuse with dignity, to show him to the door, to add this humiliation to the collection she carried silently. "Go on," she said, her voice cool. "I need help organizing my wife's library." The words were so unexpected that Martha couldn't process them immediately. "I'm sorry, what?" Caroline had a library. Extensive, over 3,000 volumes. She was passionate about books, about learning. His voice roughened slightly. "After she died, I locked the room, haven't opened it in 3 years. But it's wrong. She would have hated seeing all that knowledge gathering dust, wasted." Martha waited, unsure where this was leading. "I want to restore it, open it, make it useful again, but I can't do it alone. And I can't trust just anyone with it." He met her eyes directly. "I need someone who understands the value of books. Someone organized, someone intelligent enough to create a proper cataloging system." "And you thought of me?" "Tom Bradshaw at the freight office mentioned you once, said you could calculate shipping costs in your head faster than he could write them down. Said you'd reorganize their entire filing system in an afternoon, and it actually made sense." Lucas's mouth curved slightly. "He said you had the sharpest mind in Red Hollow, and it was a damn shame you were a woman because you could have run a railroad if anyone would let you." Martha sat very still, afraid that movement might shatter whatever strange moment this was. No one had ever spoken about her intelligence as anything other than a flaw to be apologized for. "Tom said that?" "He did. And I need that mind, Miss Hale. I need someone who can bring order to chaos, who can respect what that library meant to Caroline, who can help me honor her memory by making it live again." "Why now?" Martha asked quietly. "After 3 years?" Lucas's jaw tightened. "Because I finally understand that grief isn't loyalty. Caroline would have been furious at me for letting those books rot. She believed knowledge should be shared, that education was the antidote to ignorance and cruelty." He paused. "She would have liked you." The words hit Martha in a place she'd learned to keep sealed off. She blinked against the sudden heat behind her eyes. "This would be strictly professional," Lucas continued. "You'd come to the ranch 3 days a week. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, would be present at all times as chaperone. I'd pay you fairly, $25 a week." Martha's breath caught. That was more than she made in a month at the store. "The work would take months," Lucas added. "Maybe longer, but when it's done, that library could serve the whole community, a place where people could borrow books, learn, grow." His eyes held hers. "Your father mentioned you used to dream about places you wanted to see. Maybe you can't travel the world, Miss Hale, but you could help others do it through pages." Martha's mind raced through implications, consequences, dangers. This was impossible. The town would crucify her. Lucas Ashford was wealthy, eligible, grieving, exactly the kind of man women like Vivian Crowell circled like well-dressed vultures. For Martha to work closely with him, even with a chaperone, would be seen as presumptuous at best, predatory at worst. But when would she ever get another chance like this? To work with books, thousands of them, to use her mind without apology, to be valued for the things Red Hollow had taught her to hide. "I need to think about it," she said. Lucas nodded, rising to his feet. "Of course. Take your time. But, Miss Hale?" He paused at the door. "I'm not asking because I pity you. I'm asking because I need you. There's a difference." After he left, Martha sat in the silent office for a long time, staring at the ledgers in front of her without seeing them. 26 years of making herself small, invisible, acceptable. 26 years of swallowing her intelligence, her curiosity, her hunger for something more than this half-life of survival. Lucas Ashford had looked at her and seen capability, not defect. He'd spoken to her mind, not her appearance. He'd offered respect where none had existed before. It was the most dangerous thing anyone had ever done to her. That night, Martha lay awake in her narrow bed above the store, listening to her father's rattling breath through the thin walls. She thought about Caroline Ashford, a woman she'd never met but suddenly felt she understood, someone who'd refused to be diminished, who'd valued learning over propriety, who'd chosen passion despite the cost. She thought about the library, 3,000 volumes breathing silently in a locked room, waiting. She thought about Lucas's words. "She would have liked you." And for the first time in years, Martha Hale allowed herself to imagine a different future. Not marriage, not rescue, not transformation into something acceptable, but work, purpose, respect, a chance to be fully herself, consequences be damned. The next morning, before courage could desert her, Martha walked to the telegraph office and sent a message to the Ashford ranch. I accept. When do I start? The response came within an hour, Monday, 8 a.m. Thank you, Miss Hale. Martha folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Her hands were shaking, but her decision was steady. Red Hollow had already condemned her to invisibility. What did she have to lose by becoming visible? Everything, whispered the fear she'd learned to carry. Everything you've carefully protected. But maybe, answered a newer, fiercer voice, everything was exactly what she needed to risk. The news spread through Red Hollow like fire through dry grass. By Sunday afternoon, the entire town knew that Martha Hale, spinster, shopkeeper, woman of no consequence, would be spending 3 days a week at the Ashford Ranch, alone with Lucas, working on his dead wife's library. The gossip had teeth. Poor man doesn't know what he's gotten himself into, Mrs. Thornton announced at church, her voice carrying across the pews. That Hale woman has always been calculating. Now she's found her opportunity. It's shameful, agreed Mrs. Porter, the seamstress. A man in his position, vulnerable in his grief, and she takes advantage. Someone should warn him, added Mrs. Davies, before it's too late. The men were kinder, but no less damning. Ashford's clearly not thinking straight, the banker said. Grief makes men do strange things. He'll come to his senses. Only Tom Bradshaw, the freight manager, defended her. Martha Hale's got more integrity in her little finger than this whole town combined. If Lucas Ashford asked for her help, he chose well. But Tom's voice was drowned out by the chorus of condemnation. Red Hollow had decided Martha's story before she'd written a single page. She was the predator, Lucas the prey, and tragedy was inevitable. Martha heard it all. She'd learned years ago how to move through town like a ghost, present but unnoticed, ears open to the whispers people thought she couldn't hear. Each word landed like a blow, but she'd survived worse. She'd survived being unloved, unwanted, dismissed. She could survive being judged. Sunday evening, her father called her into the back room. He sat in his chair, his breathing worse than usual, his eyes filled with concern that had nothing to do with business. Martha girl, are you sure about this? I'm sure. The town is talking. The town is always talking, Papa. Usually about me. This is different. He struggled for breath. Lucas Ashford he's not like the others. He's important, powerful. If this goes wrong, what could possibly go wrong? Martha's voice was sharper than she intended. I'm organizing a library, that's all. 3 days a week, properly chaperoned, entirely professional. What scandal is there in that? You know how people think, how they twist things. Let them twist. Martha knelt beside his chair, taking his weathered hands in hers. Papa, you told me I was disappearing. You were right. I've spent 6 years making myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into a space this town carved out for me, a space the size of a coffin. She squeezed his hands gently. I can't do it anymore. This job, this chance to work with books, to use my mind without apologizing for it, it's the first thing in years that's made me feel alive. I won't give it up because people are cruel. Samuel Hale searched his daughter's face and saw something he hadn't seen in years. Fire. Determination. The girl who'd once believed she could be anything before the world taught her otherwise. Then do it, he said quietly. Do it, and don't look back. But Martha, be careful. Not of Lucas Ashford, of yourself. What do you mean? I mean, don't confuse respect for something more. Don't let kindness become hope. Hope is the most dangerous thing a woman like you can carry. Martha heard the warning beneath his words. Don't fall in love. Don't imagine a future that can never be yours. Don't mistake professional regard for personal affection. I know who I am, Papa. I know what I am. I'm not foolish enough to forget. But as she climbed the stairs to her room that night, she wondered if that was true. Because Lucas Ashford had looked at her and seen value, and that single moment of recognition had cracked something open inside her that she'd spent years keeping sealed. Hope was dangerous. But sometimes, Martha thought as she stared out of her window at the snow-covered street below, surviving without it was even more so. Monday morning dawned clear and cold. Martha dressed carefully, her warmest wool dress, her most practical boots, her hair pinned severely back. She looked exactly like what she was. A woman going to work, nothing more, nothing less. The ranch was 5 miles outside town, accessible by a well-maintained road that cut through pine forest and open meadow. Lucas had sent a wagon for her, driven by an older man named Henry, who greeted her with professional courtesy and said nothing during the entire journey. The Ashford ranch appeared gradually through the trees, a sprawling complex of buildings that spoke of wealth tempered by function. The main house was large but not ostentatious, built from logs and river stone, designed to withstand Montana winters. Barns, corrals, bunkhouses spread across the property in organized efficiency. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, dark shapes against white snow. Lucas met her at the house, his manner brisk and professional. "Miss Hale, thank you for coming. Let me introduce you to Mrs. Chen." The housekeeper was a small, efficient Chinese woman in her 50s, her English accented but precise, her eyes sharp with intelligence that missed nothing. She greeted Martha with a slight bow and a measuring look that suggested she'd formed her own opinions and wouldn't be swayed by town gossip. "Mrs. Chen will show you to the library," Lucas said. "I have ranch business this morning, but I'll check in this afternoon to see how you're progressing." He left, and Martha followed Mrs. Chen through the house. Rooms filled with comfortable furniture, books on tables, photographs on walls. Evidence of life lived, not just displayed. In the hallway, Martha noticed a portrait, a woman with intelligent eyes and an amused smile, dressed in clothing that suggested education and independence. "Mrs. Ashford," Mrs. Chen said, following Martha's gaze. "Good woman, smart, kind. She and we understood each other." There was weight in those words, stories untold. Before Martha could respond, Mrs. Chen opened a door at the end of the hall and stepped aside. The library took Martha's breath. The room was enormous, 2 stories tall with a spiral staircase connecting the levels. Shelves lined every wall, floor to ceiling, and more shelves ran down the center in neat rows. But the organization ended there. Books were piled haphazardly, some shelved, others stacked on tables, chairs, the floor. Dust covered everything. The air smelled of paper and neglect and profound sadness. 3,000 volumes, Lucas had said. Looking at the chaos, Martha suspected he'd underestimated. "Mr. Ashford, he locked this room after Mrs. Ashford died," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Couldn't bear to see it, couldn't bear to let it go. So it waited. Like him." Martha walked deeper into the room, her fingers trailing over leather spines, cloth covers, embossed titles. Medicine, philosophy, poetry, history, science, fiction. The collection was extraordinary, built by someone who loved learning for its own sake, who saw books as doors to infinite worlds. "She would sit here for hours," Mrs. Chen continued, "reading, thinking, writing in her journals. She said this room was where she felt most herself." Martha understood completely. This room, neglected and chaotic as it was, felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever been. She turned to Mrs. Chen. "May I begin?" The housekeeper nodded. "I bring tea at 10, lunch at noon. You need anything? You call. I am always here." The chaperone requirement wasn't subtle, but Martha appreciated the directness. Mrs. Chen would protect them both. Lucas from accusations of impropriety, Martha from assumptions of predatory intent. After Mrs. Chen left, Martha stood in the center of the library and let herself feel the full weight of the task ahead. This wasn't just about organizing books. It was about resurrecting a dream, honoring a woman's legacy, transforming grief into something that could grow. She removed her coat, rolled up her sleeves, and began. The work was methodical, satisfying in the way only restoration could be. Martha started by surveying the collection, moving through the room with paper and pencil, making notes about categories, conditions, obvious gaps that suggested missing volumes. She created a system, fiction by author, nonfiction by subject, medical texts separate from philosophy, poetry grouped by period and style. Hours passed without notice. Martha lost herself in the rhythm of order imposed on chaos, in the pleasure of matching books to proper homes, in the discovery of marginalia that revealed Caroline Ashford's mind, witty observations, passionate arguments with authors, references to other works that created a map of intellectual conversation. This woman had been brilliant, and Red Hollow, Martha realized, would have hated her for it. At noon, Mrs. Chen appeared with lunch, soup, bread, and tea served on a tray that she set on one of the cleared tables. "You work fast," the housekeeper observed, surveying the visible progress. "It's what I do," Martha said. "Find order in disorder." "Good skill. Useful." Mrs. Chen studied her thoughtfully. "Mr. Ashford, he made good choice." The simple validation meant more than it should have. Martha ducked her head, uncomfortable with praise. That afternoon, Lucas returned as promised. He stood in the doorway, taking in the transformation, cleared floor space, books organized into preliminary categories, the beginning of a cataloging system sketched on paper. "Miss Hale, this is remarkable. You've accomplished more in one day than I'd hoped for in a week." Martha wiped dust from her hands. "The collection is extraordinary. Your wife had exquisite taste." "She did." Lucas moved into the room, his eyes traveling over the shelves with an expression Martha couldn't quite read. Grief, yes, but something else too. Relief, maybe. Or permission. She used to say that every book was a conversation with someone she'd never meet. That reading was the closest thing to immortality humans could achieve. She was right. "You would have liked each other," Lucas said, and this time the words carried weight that made Martha's chest tighten. Caroline didn't suffer fools, and she had no patience for people who mistook conformity for virtue. She'd have appreciated your mind. "Mr. Ashford? Lucas? If we're going to be working together for months, formality seems unnecessary." Martha hesitated. First names implied familiarity, friendship, dangerous territory, but refusing seemed cowardly. "Lucas," she said carefully, "and I'm Martha." His smile was slight but genuine. "Martha, then. Tell me what you need." They spent the next hour discussing the project, cataloging systems, preservation methods, whether to organize chronologically or by author. Lucas listened to her ideas without interruption, asked intelligent questions, deferred to her expertise in ways that made Martha's chest ache with unfamiliar emotion. This was respect, true respect, offered without condescension or surprise, and it was more intoxicating than any wine. When the afternoon light began to fade, Lucas called for the wagon to take her home. As Martha gathered her coat and notes, he stopped her with a question. "Are people talking?" She could have lied, should have lied, but something about the directness of his gaze demanded honesty. "Yes." "I'm sorry. I didn't think about how this might affect your reputation. My reputation was already damaged by the crime of being unmarried at 26. Let them talk. Their opinions don't change the value of the work." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "You're stronger than they deserve." "I'm practical. Strength would require caring about their judgment. I stopped caring years ago." It wasn't entirely true, but it was true enough. The wagon ride home gave Martha time to think, to process, to acknowledge the dangerous truth her father had warned against. She liked Lucas Ashford, not as an employer or benefactor, but as a person. He listened. He valued her contributions. He treated her mind as an asset rather than a liability. And that, Martha knew as Red Hollow's lights appeared through the darkness, was the most dangerous thing that could happen to a woman like her. Because Lucas Ashford was kind. But kindness wasn't love. Respect wasn't desire. And no amount of intellectual compatibility would transform her into the kind of woman a man like him could actually want. She needed to remember that, needed to protect herself against hope. But as she climbed the stairs to her room that night, her mind still full of books and conversations, and the way Lucas had looked at Caroline's portrait with such profound loss, Martha realized protection might already be too late. The crack Lucas had opened on that first snowy morning was widening, and she had no idea how to stop it. 3 weeks passed in a rhythm Martha had never known before. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at the ranch. The rest of her time managing the store, while her father's health continued its slow decline. The library work consumed her in ways that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with hunger finally being fed. She arrived each morning to find Mrs. Chen waiting with tea and quiet approval. The housekeeper's presence a constant reminder of propriety, even as something deeper took root beneath the surface of professional collaboration. Lucas would join her mid-morning, ostensibly to check progress, but increasingly to discuss the books themselves. What Caroline had thought about Darwin's theories, how she'd annotated her volumes of Whitman, the marginalia that revealed arguments with Emerson that would never be resolved. She wrote in the margins that Emerson was brilliant but blind to his own privilege, Lucas said one Wednesday, holding a worn copy of Self-Reliance. Said self-reliance was easier when you started with money and social position. Martha looked up from the medical text she was cataloging. She wasn't wrong. No, Caroline was rarely wrong. He set the book down carefully. She would have eviscerated Red Hollow's social structure, the hypocrisy of it. Is that why people didn't like her? The question slipped out before Martha could stop it. Too personal, too revealing of her own understanding of what it meant to be disliked for seeing clearly. But Lucas didn't seem offended. People didn't dislike Caroline, they were afraid of her. There's a difference. She asked questions no one wanted to answer. Why should women's education stop at needlework and music? Why were Chinese workers paid half what white men earned for the same labor? Why did the church collect tithes from poor families while wealthy ranchers bought their way into heaven with donations that cost them nothing? Martha's hand stilled on the leather-bound anatomy text in her lap. She sounds formidable. She was. Lucas's voice carried that particular roughness grief brought. And lonely. People admired her from a distance, but very few actually befriended her. They couldn't reconcile intelligence with femininity, strength with kindness, so they kept her at arm's length and called it respect. The parallel sat between them, unspoken but clear. Martha understood that loneliness, had lived it, still lived it. The library was her refuge, Lucas continued, the only place she didn't have to perform or pretend or make herself smaller to fit someone else's expectations. I understand that, Martha said quietly. Their eyes met across the space of 3 years and 2 very different lives, and something shifted. Recognition, perhaps, or the acknowledgement that understanding could exist between people who seemed to have nothing in common except the experience of being misjudged. Lucas cleared his throat, breaking the moment. I should let you work. I have accounts to review. After he left, Martha sat very still, Caroline's medical text forgotten in her lap. The conversation had crossed some invisible boundary from professional to personal, from discussing books to discussing the people who'd loved them. And Martha had responded with honesty instead of the careful deflection she'd perfected over years of protecting herself. Dangerous. Her father's warning echoed, don't confuse respect for something more. But what happened when respect felt like water after years in the desert? When being truly seen, even briefly, became more precious than safety? Martha forced herself back to work, cataloging with mechanical precision while her mind spun in directions she couldn't afford to follow. That evening, Red Hollow delivered its verdict. Martha was closing the store when Vivian Crowell walked in, bringing with her the scent of expensive perfume and the air of someone accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted. Vivian had left Red Hollow 5 years ago to marry a cattle broker in Denver, a marriage that had apparently ended in expensive divorce and her return home wrapped in widow's weeds despite the man still being very much alive. She was beautiful in the way that opened doors, blonde, refined, with the kind of delicate features that made men want to protect and possess. She'd known Lucas before his marriage to Caroline, some unfinished courtship that had ended when he chose the doctor's daughter over the rancher's niece. Miss Hale, Vivian said, her voice honey over steel, I need fabric for new curtains, something refined, though I suppose you don't stock much that would suit my taste. The insult was delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Martha kept her expression neutral. I can order from Denver if you'd like to look through the catalogs. How accommodating. Vivian moved through the store, trailing gloved fingers over merchandise with the air of someone slumming. I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time at the Ashford Ranch. Here it was, the real reason for the visit. I'm cataloging Mrs. Ashford's library. Mr. Ashford hired me for the work. How generous of him, though one wonders why he'd choose you specifically. Unless... Vivian's pause was calculated, her implication clear. Well, grief does make men vulnerable to certain kinds of manipulation. Martha's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. If you'd like to discuss fabric, I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I'm closing for the evening. Of course. You must be exhausted from all that organizing. Vivian's smile sharpened. Though I should warn you, Martha, may I call you Martha? Playing on a widower's loneliness is a dangerous game, especially when you're so clearly out of your depth. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you? Vivian leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a shout. Lucas Ashford is one of the wealthiest men in Montana. He could have anyone. And you think he needs you for your mind? How charmingly naive. The words hit exactly where they were meant to, the soft, unprotected place where Martha kept her deepest fears, that she was being used, that Lucas's respect was pity in disguise, that she was foolish enough to believe intelligence could ever compensate for her lack of beauty. Lucas and I grew up together, Vivian continued. Our families expected us to marry before Caroline inserted herself into the picture with her books and her radical ideas. Now that she's gone, she straightened, smoothing her skirts with practiced elegance. Well, some things are simply meant to be, and some people need to recognize when they're intruding on something that doesn't concern them. Martha found her voice, found the spine that years of dismissal had forged into something stronger than Vivian could imagine. I'm employed by Mr. Ashford to do a job, nothing more. Your assumptions about anything beyond that are your own problem, not mine. We'll see. Vivian moved toward the door, then paused. Martha, dear, a word of friendly advice. Women like you, plain, unmarried, desperate, are always the first to misread kindness as affection. Don't embarrass yourself by imagining you could ever be more than hired help. Lucas needs someone appropriate, someone who understands his world. She left in a swirl of skirts and expensive perfume, leaving Martha standing alone in the darkening store, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The encounter rattled her more than it should have. Because Vivian had voiced every doubt Martha carried, every fear she'd tried to bury beneath the satisfaction of meaningful work, that she was deluding herself, that Lucas's respect was temporary, contingent, ultimately meaningless because no amount of intellectual compatibility could transform her into someone worthy of genuine regard. That night, Martha barely slept. She told herself Vivian was cruel, jealous, threatened by Martha's proximity to a man she still wanted. But cruelty often spoke truth, didn't it? Especially the kind that burrowed beneath skin and made homes in the places you'd tried to fortify against exactly this kind of invasion. Friday morning arrived gray and bitter cold. Martha almost didn't go to the ranch, almost sent word that she was ill, that the store needed her, that continuing seemed foolish in the face of Vivian's warnings. But the library was waiting, the work was real, and Martha had never been one to run from discomfort. Lucas noticed her distraction immediately. Is everything all right? Fine, Martha said too quickly. Just tired. He didn't push, but his concern was evident in the way he hovered slightly longer than usual, in the careful attention he paid to her responses during their morning discussion of classification systems. They were debating the merits of Dewey Decimal versus alphabetical organization when Mrs. Chen interrupted with an announcement that made Martha's stomach drop. Miss Crowell here to see you, Mr. Ashford. Vivian swept into the library like she owned it, her beauty amplified by winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She didn't acknowledge Martha's presence, focusing entirely on Lucas with a warmth that suggested intimacy earned through history. Lucas, darling, I hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was passing by and thought I'd stop to see how you were managing. Her eyes swept the library, taking in the organized shelves, the neat stacks of cataloged books, the evidence of substantial progress. My goodness, you've accomplished quite a bit. Miss Hale is extremely efficient, Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. I'm sure. Vivian finally glanced at Martha, the look dismissive. Though I have to wonder if this is really the best approach. Caroline's library deserves someone with proper training, a professional librarian perhaps, or someone from the university. The implication was clear. Martha was inadequate, unqualified, presumptuous for thinking her shopkeeper's skills sufficient for such an important task. Miss Hale's qualifications are more than adequate, Lucas said, an edge in his voice that made Vivian's eyes widen slightly. Of course. I didn't mean to imply. She recovered quickly, her smile never faltering. I'm simply concerned about honoring Caroline's legacy properly. She was so particular about her books. You barely knew Caroline. The words were quiet but sharp enough to cut. Vivian's composure slipped for just a moment before she reconstructed it with visible effort. I knew her well enough to understand she valued excellence. And I know you, Lucas. I know you're still grieving, still vulnerable. It worries me when I see people taking advantage of that vulnerability. Martha's hands clenched on the book she was holding. The accusation was thinly veiled, the target unmistakable. Lucas's expression hardened. I think you should go, Vivian. Lucas, please, I'm only trying to help. We're old friends. I care about you. Then respect my decisions, including my choice to employ Miss Hale. Vivian's eyes flickered between Lucas and Martha, calculation evident in their depths. Very well, but if you need anything at all, you know where to find me. Some connections run too deep to sever completely. After she left, the silence in the library felt heavy with things unsaid. Martha focused on the book in her hands, willing herself invisible, wishing she could disappear into the pages. I apologize for that, Lucas said finally. You don't need to apologize. She's right. I'm not a trained librarian. Maybe you should consider... Martha. He crossed the space between them, stopping close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. Vivian is wrong about everything. You're not taking advantage. You're not unqualified. You're doing exactly what I hired you to do, and you're doing it brilliantly. She clearly has feelings about your situation. Vivian has feelings about opportunities she thinks she's entitled to. His jaw tightened. She wanted to marry me once. I chose Caroline instead. That was 10 years ago, but apparently some people don't accept decisions that don't favor them. Martha stepped back, creating distance that felt necessary and painful in equal measure. I don't want to cause problems. You're not causing problems. You're organizing books. If that threatens Vivian's sense of entitlement, that's not your concern. But it was her concern, Martha thought, because Vivian represented everything Martha wasn't: beautiful, connected, acceptable. And Vivian's threat was real in ways Lucas, protected by wealth and gender, might not fully understand. The rest of the day passed in strained normalcy. Martha worked with forced focus while her mind spun through implications and consequences. Vivian wouldn't stop at one visit. Women like her never did. They circled and strategized and found ways to eliminate competition without appearing to lift a finger. And Martha was competition now, whether she wanted to be or not. Vivian had seen something in Lucas's defense of her, some hint of regard that went beyond employer and employee. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was everything, but perception mattered more than truth in Red Hollow, and Vivian was an expert at shaping perception. That evening, Martha's father was waiting when she returned home. His color was worse, his breathing labored, but his eyes were sharp with concern. "Town's talking again," he said without preamble. "Town's always talking. This is different. Vivian Crowell's been making rounds, suggesting things, planting seeds." Martha sank into the chair across from him. "What kind of seeds?" "That you've been inappropriate with Lucas Ashford, that you're trying to trap him, that your work at the ranch is a cover for something less professional." He paused, struggling for breath. "She's poisoning the well, Martha. Carefully, cleverly. By the time she's done, this whole town will believe you're some kind of predator." "I'm cataloging a library, Papa, that's all." "I know that, you know that. But truth doesn't matter when lies are prettier." He leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the chair arms. "You need to be careful. Vivian Crowell is dangerous. She's got money, connections, and a vendetta. You've got none of those things. So I should quit? Let her win?" "I'm saying you should protect yourself, because no one else will." Martha wanted to argue, to insist that the work mattered more than gossip, that she wouldn't be bullied into invisibility again. But the fear in her father's eyes stopped her. He'd watched Red Hollow's cruelty before. He knew how quickly whispers became weapons. "I'll be careful," she promised, even though she had no idea what careful looked like anymore. The weekend brought fresh snow and fresh rumors. Martha heard them at church, in the general store, whispered behind cupped hands by women who'd perfected the art of destroying reputations while maintaining plausible deniability. She's always been calculating, that Martha Hale. Too smart for her own good. Poor Lucas doesn't see it. Men never do when they're lonely. Someone should warn him before it's too late. By Monday, the story had evolved. Martha wasn't just working at the ranch, she was pursuing Lucas shamelessly, using the library as an excuse for proximity, taking advantage of his grief and isolation. Vivian's fingerprints were all over the narrative, but she was never the source. She simply repeated what others had said, adding concerned observations about Martha's unsuitability, Lucas's vulnerability, the tragedy of a good man being manipulated by an opportunistic woman. It was masterful character assassination, delivered with such apparent sympathy that even people who liked Martha found themselves doubting. Martha walked into the ranch that Monday with her head high and her stomach in knots. Mrs. Chen took one look at her face and made tea without asking. "Town is small place," the housekeeper said, setting the cup in front of Martha with gentle firmness. "Small minds, big mouths, you ignore. It's not that simple." "Is exactly that simple. You do good work. Mr. Ashford knows this, I know this. What others think does not change truth." Martha wrapped her hands around the warm cup, drawing comfort from its heat. "Mrs. Chen, why did you stay? After Mrs. Ashford died, you could have found work anywhere." The housekeeper was quiet for a moment. "Because Mr. Ashford, he is good man. And because Mrs. Ashford, she was good woman who treated me like human being, not servant. In this country, that is rare thing." Her eyes held Martha's. "You understand. You are like her, smart, strong. Refuse to pretend to be less than you are. Mrs. Ashford was beautiful and educated and came from a respected family. I'm none of those things. Mrs. Ashford was feared and whispered about and called radical and inappropriate. She was respected only after death, when people could admire her safely. While alive?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. "This town wanted her silent, just like it wants you silent now." The words settled in Martha's chest like stones and wings both, heavy with truth, lifting with possibility that she wasn't alone in this particular struggle. Lucas found her an hour later, deep in the medical section, where Caroline's annotations revealed a fascination with frontier medicine and women's health. He hesitated in the doorway, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Martha, we need to talk." Her heart sank. Here it was. The conversation where he acknowledged the rumors and suggested perhaps they should pause the work until things settled down. Professional distance, proper boundaries, all the things that would protect him while abandoning her to Red Hollow's judgment. "I've heard the talk," Lucas said, closing the door despite Mrs. Chen's presence being unnecessary with it open. The gesture felt protective, private. "Vivian's campaign against you." Martha kept her eyes on the book in her hands. "It's fine. I expected it." "It's not fine. She's lying. And I won't stand by while she destroys your reputation to satisfy her own agenda." "What can you do? Tell people to stop talking? They won't. They like their version of events better than the truth." Lucas crossed to where she stood, his expression fierce with something Martha couldn't quite name. "I can tell the truth, publicly. I can make it clear that you were hired for your skills, that your work is exceptional, that anyone suggesting otherwise is speaking from ignorance and malice. That will only make it worse. It'll look like you're defending me because there's something to defend against." "Then what would you have me do? Ignore it while they tear you apart?" The frustration in his voice startled her. This wasn't professional concern. This was personal. And that realization sent fear and hope warring through Martha's chest. "Why do you care?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "I'm just someone you hired to organize books." Lucas stared at her, something breaking across his face like weather. "Is that really what you think?" "I don't know what to think anymore." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she'd never seen from him before. "Martha, these past weeks, working with you, talking about Caroline's books, seeing how you understand what she was trying to build here. It's been the first time in 3 years I haven't felt completely hollow." He paused, seeming to struggle with words that wouldn't come easily. "You're not just someone I hired. You're..." You're the first person since Caroline who's made me remember what it feels like to have a conversation that matters. To be understood. Martha's breath caught. This was dangerous territory, the kind her father had warned against, the kind that led to hope, and hope led to heartbreak. Lucas, you're grieving. You miss your wife. I remind you of her because I love books like she did, but I'm not her. I'm not beautiful or educated or from the right family. I'm exactly what Vivian says, a shopkeeper with pretensions above my station. Stop. The command was gentle but firm. Stop reciting their lies like they're truth. They're not lies. I am plain. I am unmarried at 26. I am unsuitable by every measure Red Hollow uses. Red Hollow's measures are worthless. Lucas moved closer, his eyes intense. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see intelligence that doesn't apologize for itself. Strength that's been tested and didn't break. Integrity that refuses to bend even when bending would be easier. I see someone who understands that worth isn't measured in beauty or birth, but in character and capability. Martha shook her head even as her heart hammered against her ribs. You're being kind. I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely honest. He took a breath, steadying himself. I'm not asking for anything, Martha. I know my position, my wealth, the complications that would come with anything beyond professional respect, but I need you to know that Vivian is wrong. You're not taking advantage. If anything, I'm the one who's been selfish, keeping you here because talking to you has become the best part of my week. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to fully examine. Martha felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. I should go, she whispered. Don't, please. Lucas's voice was rough. I know I've complicated everything, but don't let Vivian and her poison drive you away from work you love. Don't let them make you smaller again. And if staying makes everything worse, if the talk damages you, let it. The certainty in his voice was absolute. I've spent 3 years letting grief make my decisions, letting fear keep me locked away from anything that might hurt. I'm done with that. If Red Hollow wants to judge me for respecting someone they've decided isn't worthy of respect, then they can judge. Martha looked up at him. This man who'd seen her when everyone else looked through her, who valued her mind in a world that had taught her to hide it, who was willing to weather scandal for the principle of fairness. And she realized with terrifying clarity that her father had been right about hope being dangerous. Because she was hoping now, despite every lesson experience had taught. Hoping that maybe, impossibly, this could become something more than employer and employee, more than mutual respect between two people who understood loneliness. I'll stay, she said quietly. But Lucas, you need to understand. I can't afford to hope for more than this. I can't afford to imagine a future that isn't possible. It would break something in me that's barely holding together as it is. His expression softened with understanding and something that looked heartbreakingly like regret. I know. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said, I'm glad you did. I needed to hear that I'm not imagining the respect between us. But I also need to be realistic. You're Lucas Ashford. I'm Martha Hale. Those names don't belong in the same sentence except when one is employed by the other. Martha, please. She held up a hand, stopping whatever he was about to say. Let's just focus on the library, on the work. It's safer that way. For both of us. Lucas nodded slowly, accepting the boundary, even as his eyes said he wanted to argue. All right, the library, the work. But they both knew something had shifted. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. The truth was out now, hanging in the air between them. He valued her, she mattered to him, and neither of them knew what to do with that knowledge except try desperately to ignore it. The rest of the day passed in careful professionalism, both of them working to reconstruct the walls that had crumbled. But Martha felt the change in every glance, every accidental brush of hands when reaching for the same book, every moment of shared silence that said more than words could. When Henry drove her home that evening, Martha stared out at the darkening landscape and tried to reconcile the impossible. Lucas Ashford cared about her, not as charity, not as pity, but as a person whose company he genuinely valued. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark, knowing that one wrong step would send her plummeting into devastation she might not survive. because caring mattered. But caring wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. And Martha had learned long ago that sometimes the cruelest thing life could do was show you exactly what you could never have. The town meeting was Vivian's masterpiece, a public execution disguised as civic concern. She'd spent 2 weeks laying groundwork, whispered conversations over tea, strategic visits to the bank and church, careful cultivation of fear among Red Hollow's most influential families. By the time the announcement went up for a special assembly to discuss matters of community morality, the verdict was already written. They just needed Martha present to deliver it. Martha saw the notice on Wednesday morning, posted outside the town hall in letters large enough to be read from across the street. Her stomach turned to ice even before she read the details. Special meeting, Friday evening. All citizens encouraged to attend. Topic: protecting community standards and vulnerable members of society. They're not even trying to hide it, her father said, his voice weak from the bed where he'd been confined for the past 3 days. The illness that had been stealing him slowly had accelerated, leaving him barely able to stand. They're calling you out specifically without using your name. I know. Martha folded the newspaper with hands that trembled despite her efforts to stay calm. Vulnerable members of society. That means Lucas. You could leave town before Friday, go to your aunt's in Wyoming. And let them win? Let them destroy what's left of my reputation without even defending myself? Martha shook her head. No. If they want to condemn me, they'll have to do it to my face. Her father's expression was equal parts pride and terror. Martha, girl, you don't understand what you're up against. Vivian has money, family connections, half the town already believing her version. You have nothing but the truth, and truth has never been enough in places like this. Then I'll make it enough. But privately, Martha knew he was right. She'd spent the past week watching Vivian's campaign escalate from whispers to open accusation. The bank had suddenly required her father to pay outstanding debts immediately, debts that had been carried for months without issue. Suppliers had delayed shipments to the store. Customers who'd been friendly for years now crossed the street to avoid greeting her. Mrs. Thornton had actually spat at Martha's feet outside the church, called her a Jezebel in front of a dozen witnesses, and no one had said a word in Martha's defense. Red Hollow had already decided. The meeting was just formality, public theater to sanctify judgment already passed. Thursday morning, Martha went to the ranch knowing it might be the last time. The library was nearly complete, 3 months of work that had transformed chaos into a cathedral of knowledge. The cataloging system was functional and elegant, each book properly shelved and documented, Caroline's marginalia preserved in notes that would help future readers understand the conversation she'd started. It was the best work Martha had ever done, and it was about to become evidence of her supposed manipulation. Lucas met her at the door, his expression grim. You've heard about the meeting. Hard to miss. I won't let them do this to you. Martha stepped past him into the house, into the library that had become more home than the rooms above her father's store. You can't stop them. They've made up their minds. Then I'll stand up there and tell them the truth, that you were hired to do a job, that you've done it brilliantly, that every accusation against you is a lie. And they'll say you're defending me because I've seduced you, that you're proof of my manipulation, not evidence against it. Martha turned to face him, forcing herself to meet his eyes. Lucas, anything you say in my defense will only make this worse, for both of us. So I'm supposed to stay silent while they destroy you? You're supposed to protect yourself. You have a ranch to run, a legacy to maintain. I'm just... She stopped, the words sticking in her throat. Just what? Lucas closed the distance between them, his voice low and fierce. Just a shopkeeper? Just someone I hired? Is that really what you think after everything? Martha's composure cracked. I think I'm someone who made the mistake of believing respect could protect me from reality. I think I let myself imagine just for a moment that maybe I could have something more than survival. And I think Vivian was right. Women like me don't get fairy tales. We get reminded of our place. Your place is here. Lucas's hands came up like he wanted to reach for her, then dropped. The restraint in the gesture hurt more than touch would have. In this library, doing work that matters, being valued for exactly who you are. For 3 days a week, in a world that doesn't exist beyond these walls. Martha's voice broke. But out there, in Red Hollow, I'm exactly what they've always said. Too plain, too smart, too unmarried to be anything but pathetic. Stop saying that. Why? It's what everyone thinks. What you probably thought before you needed someone to organize books. Lucas flinched like she'd struck him. That's not fair. None of this is fair. Martha turned away, blinking against tears that threatened to spill. I knew better. I knew hope was dangerous, but I let myself hope anyway, and now I'm paying for it. The silence that followed was broken by Mrs. Chen's quiet entrance with tea neither of them wanted. The housekeeper set the tray down and looked between them with an expression that suggested she understood far more than they'd said aloud. Miss Hale, she said carefully, you are strongest person I know. Stronger than Mrs. Ashford, even. She had education and family to support her. You have nothing but yourself, and still you do not bend. Maybe I should bend. Maybe that's the lesson. Know when you're beaten. Mrs. Ashford, she never bend. They hated her for it, but she never regret. Mrs. Chen poured tea with steady hands. You go to meeting tomorrow. You tell truth. What happens after? At least you know you did not make yourself small for their comfort. After Mrs. Chen left, Martha and Lucas stood in the library surrounded by the evidence of their collaboration. Shelves organized with care, books preserved with respect, a system that would serve the community for generations if anyone ever had the courage to actually open the room to the public. All of it about to be tainted by scandal neither of them had earned. I'm going to the meeting, Lucas said finally, and I'm going to speak. Lucas, no. Listen to me. I've spent 3 years hiding from life because grief was easier than risk, easier than facing the possibility of loss again. But these months working with you have reminded me what it feels like to actually care about something, someone, beyond just surviving each day. He took a breath, steadying himself. I won't hide anymore, whatever the cost. The cost will be your reputation, your standing in the community. Then let it cost. Some things matter more. Martha wanted to argue, to protect him from the consequences of defending her, but the fierce determination in his eyes stopped her. This was his choice, made with full knowledge of the price. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. I'm doing this as much for myself as for you, because if I let them silence someone I respect, someone who's done nothing wrong except refuse to apologize for being brilliant, then I'm complicit in their cruelty, and I won't be that man. Friday arrived too quickly and not quickly enough. Martha dressed with care, her best dress, navy wool with a high collar and long sleeves, conservative enough to deflect any accusations of impropriety. She pinned her hair back severely, no softness, no vulnerability on display. She was going to war, and she dressed for it. Her father insisted on attending despite his condition, leaning heavily on her arm as they walked the 3 blocks to the town hall. Red Hollow had turned out in force. Every pew was packed, familiar faces arranged in judgment. The Thorntons, the Davies, the